Hey, what's up everyone? Welcome back to my channel. My name's Calvin Acosta and I haven't uploaded in 5 months. I've been busy moving across the country, back home to Los Angeles, so social media just hasn't really been a big priority for me right now. But if any of you care to know, I am settled in now and ready to get back to creating, so if there are any local LA photographers following me on social media or YouTube, hit me up. Let's be friends. Okay, so I'm going to be talking about my methods for skin retouching today. I'll be using techniques like dodge and burn and frequency separation. I already have a video for my dodge and burn technique that I will link down below if you want to check that out. But for frequency separation, I'm just using an action that I created a while back, so I won't go into too much detail about that process in this video. But there's like a million frequency separation videos on YouTube right now that you could check out. If you want, I'll link some of those down below that are my favorites too. Maybe that can help you out. In the future, maybe I'll make a video on that, but right now I just don't really feel like there's a necessity for it. Now, I know I've made this recommendation before, but I will recommend that you guys start retouching skin on an editing tablet of some kind that is pressure sensitive. I use a Wacom. If you want to know more about editing tablets, let me know, and then I could probably make a video detailing what they're for and how to use them. But trust me, you're not living your best life right now if you're still editing on a mouse or a trackpad. Final disclaimer, this is just my method for skin retouching that works best for me and gives me the results that I want. If this doesn't necessarily work for you, then you can just ask questions in the comments and I'll do my best to further explain anything that I talked about in this video. If we can't help you there, then again, there's like a million other YouTube tutorials for probably the same things that I'm doing right now. You just got to find what works best for you. And without further ado, let's get into it. Alright, so as you can see, we have this lovely photo of Anjali here. The first thing I'm going to go into that I always do is start off with my frequency separation layer. And that's going to do its thing. And then I will actually click the background layer. And then I don't know if oh yeah, cool. I made a dodge and burn action that I do too as well. So I'm going to rename this to dodge and burn. I'm going to actually put that above the frequency separation layer. First things first, we're going to click this little arrow here and then we're going to go into our low frequency layer copy, and what I'm going to do is actually create a black and white layer. This is my first tip to you. If you guys aren't editing skin on a black and white layer, you're doing yourself a disservice because your eyes see texture and details better in black and white than they do in color. And it's also much better if you're doing highlighting and contouring to do it in black and white, because again, your eyes can see, you know, tonal differences better than it can see shades of color. So to do that, go to layer, new adjustment layer, black and white. And you can name it. I'm gonna name it the visual layer. You don't have to name it, but I just call this the visual layer so I know why it's there. Okay, press enter, and then I'm actually gonna drag the reds way down to where you can now see the shadows and the highlight definition interface. And you'll notice immediately that also brings out a lot more of the texture that you weren't otherwise able to see as clearly without it. So I'm actually gonna put this layer right at the very top of everything. So just drag it up there. Okay. So, my first step is to really zoom into the face here, and you're gonna wanna use your mixer brush. This tool is probably the most important tool that I use for retouching skin because it really helps you to even out the tones without having to use a Gaussian blur or anything like that. Those are my old methods and I've found this to be much more efficient. If you don't already have the mixer brush tool open in Photoshop, all you have to do is go to Edit, Toolbar. This will pop up, and then just make sure the mixer brush is going to be on the right side. Just make sure you drag it over to the left side, and then you can put it in whatever order that you want to so you can access it quickly. Since I already have it here, I'm just going to click the mixer brush tool. Make sure that wet is set to 30%, load is set to 30%, mix is set to 30%, and flow is also set to 20%. I also have the smoothing radius here set to 40%, but you can adjust that to your liking because that's going to be different if you're using a tablet or if you're doing this with a mouse. After that, I'm going to choose a pretty large brush size because I don't want to mix too much of the tones in the face. However, I do want to make the base a lot smoother than what it is. So we're just going to make the brush about, I'm going to say about like 800 pixels. And then we're just gonna go in and I'm going to physically push the highlights into the shadows slightly more. And I'm gonna click the before and after so you can see what it's doing. You'll notice it's filled in the shadows a bit in the top corner of her forehead. It doesn't look as shadowy there, so I'm gonna probably speed up the video for this process and show you the areas that I touched up when I'm done. So, I'm gonna see you in like a hypersecond. Okay, it is important that you don't go overboard with this because you can potentially change the shape of your model's face, and I don't really like to do that. I mean, it's personal preference. If you want to change the shape of your model's face, then by all means go ahead and do it. But for me personally, I try to keep the model as close to looking like herself as possible. So what I will do is every now and then check my before and after to make sure I'm not doing too overboard or going too overboard for it. And then just check your progress every now and then, basically. Okay, so you notice that I'm using a smaller brush right now. I'm doing this to go into the smaller areas, like the highlight portions of her face here, 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 and down the bridge of the nose. I don't need to use such a larger brush for those areas because you're going to be blending too much of the highlights into the shadows and it's going to start to just look flat. So I tend to take a smaller brush for the areas that have tons of highlight on them. You'll see what it looks like when I'm done. And the motions that I'm using for this as well, I'm going to the center of the highlight and pushing outwards, and it kind of helps to make that triangle shape more pronounced. You don't want to just go in, you know, just swiping over and across the face because you're just blending your tones back and forth. So pick a central part and then just go outwards from that. And I'm also swiping in one direction. I'm not taking it across. It looks like I'm doing this, but I'm actually going in one smooth direction. And I'm not taking it both front and back. Okay, so checking the progress on it now, this is where we're at. This is the before, this is the after, that's the before, that's the after. I'm noticing areas where I'm not entirely happy with the outcome because it is changing the shape of the model's face here. So what I'm gonna do is go back into the before and after, check where I can push these shadows back to kind of get the shape that it had before. Whoop. Okay, now that I have the tones as even as I want them to be, this is when I would go in and take out the blemishes on the high frequency layer. You'll notice with the before and after, the highlights have been kind of flattened out a bit here, but we're gonna actually correct that when we go into our dodge and burn layer and bring all that back. So let's go into the high frequency layer now, zoom into the skin to where you can see all the fun stuff, like the texture and the blemishes. And then I'm actually going to use the clone stamp tool, and with a very, very tiny brush, I'm at about maybe 15 pixels, probably even less actually, like 8 pixels. I'm gonna go into the skin and take out all the little blemishes, the stray hairs, or the fine lines, or anything that I just don't feel like, you know, improves the image. I am going to speed this part up, so just enjoy this. Now, you don't want to take away all of the texture in the skin. Obviously, you do want there to be some parts there that still show through because it adds realism to the image. So though you'll notice me leave some spots in, it's really just because I don't want her to look like a piece of plastic. So yeah. Okay, so I think I've taken out as many blemishes as I'd like to at the moment, and I'm noticing there's still some tonal differences here that I'm not too happy with. So I'm gonna go back into my low frequency layer, pick up the mixer brush, get a smaller brush, and I'm probably gonna take my smoothing down to probably 20 also. Okay. The mistake I see a lot of people make when editing skin is that you try to use the clone stamp to cover over dark patches and things like that. I wouldn't recommend doing that because it is a very destructive way of editing. You are removing both the texture and tone of the skin when you do that. So when you're editing tones and you're using frequency separation, always make sure you're just doing the tones on the lower layer and you're not trying to do correcting tones and texture in the high frequency layer, because it's just going to end up looking like a mess. Okay, so this is where we're at after retoning the skin and then removing some of the unwanted texture. I'm gonna take a look at my before and after to see where the progress is. This is the before, this is the after. Again, you'll notice some of the highlights have been removed from the image, but we are gonna add those back in our dodge and burn layer. So I think I'm happy with where this is for now, and then we're gonna move on and see how it looks with color. Okay, so that's where we're at with color. That's the before, that's the after, and the skin's already looking much more even toned, much more cleaned up looking. So we're gonna go into our dodge and burn layer now. The trick that I do for adding the highlights back properly to the skin is I actually make the frequency separation layer invisible. So you get back to your original image, go back into the black and white, and then you'll see where the highlights naturally were before we even retouch the image. I'll go into my dodge layer, pick my paintbrush up, take white, and I'll make sure my opacity is set to around 15, flow to about 10, and then the smoothing I'll usually bring up to about 30. Okay. And then I will go in with a brush that's relatively the same size as the highlight area, about like that. And then I'll just color over it and emphasize it and make it a bit brighter. So that way, when we're done, the highlights look pretty much like how they looked before. Every now and then I will make the frequency layer visible so that I can see what I'm doing and see how it's affecting the entire image as a whole. But for the most part, I'll leave it invisible just so I can see exactly where to put these highlights. What I also like to do is build this up in layers. So I'll go to blur, Gaussian blur on our, make sure you click the dodge layer first, and go to blur, Gaussian blur. And I like to feather out those edges a bit so it blends more seamlessly into the skin. Let me zoom out so I can see how feathered those edges are. I think that's good. And then I'll actually go back in with a smaller brush this time and really just build it up. So take it to the center, add a bit more. Okay, and we'll do the same thing for the burn layer. So go ahead and click the burn layer. Make sure your frequency separation layer is still invisible at this point. Now we're just gonna be focusing on the shadows of the skin. I'm probably gonna use a slightly bigger brush for this and take your hardness down to 0%. And I think I'm gonna use a brush that's about that size. And I will just emphasize the shadows on the face this time. So we're just gonna go under the cheekbones, beneath the jawline where the light hits the neck, or where the shadow hits the neck actually. Check it before and after. I think it's looking good so far. I'm gonna touch the sides of the nose a bit, the temples of the forehead. So far that's looking good. I'm gonna get a smaller brush and go down the sides of the nose. Alright, so with Dodge and Burn, this is the before, that's the after. And I'm actually going to click both this layer and the frequency separation layer. I'm going to group them into one group so I have all my skin retouching in one area. So I'm going to just press Control or Command G if you're on Apple. And then toggle the before and after so you can see. That's the skin retouched. This is the before. There's a lot of texture, a lot of detail. The highlights and shadows look really good. We shot this with a bare flash, so there was no beauty dish or anything like that because I wanted the shadows to be really harsh. And this is the after the retouching. We've got our highlights back, our contours are there. We've still got the texture in the model's skin, and then we've evened out the tone of it. So let's see how everything looks in color. Okay, that's looking pretty good so far. We're gonna zoom in so you can see. Okay, the highlights, I think I'm gonna feather out a bit more. So blur, Gaussian blur. Okay, so with this method, the good thing about it is that if you feel like you've gone too far, like some areas I feel like I might have pushed a little bit too far in. So what I'll do, I'll never leave my opacity at 100%. I will take it down to 0 and just slowly drag it up to where I like it the most. And I think 65 is where we'll do it. Probably actually 70. And that looks good to me. And again, this is all just personal preference. If you want it to look a little bit more natural, you can bump your opacity lower to maybe 30–40%. I like it to look a little bit more perfect, so I'll tend to stay around the 70 to 75% range. And then if I feel like I need to go over any additional areas, again, I'll just go back into the frequency separation layer, go to high frequency, and then if I need to touch anything up, I'll do that here. Okay, so typically speaking, this is not where I would stop retouching, but this video is actually a two-part series, and the second part is going to be about retouching makeup and sharpening your image. I didn't want to put both parts in the video because who wants to watch a 30-minute video on retouching, but if you like this video and learned something cool today, feel free to give me a thumbs up and subscribe to this channel. It really does keep me motivated to keep making more of these. You can follow my social media, the links will be down below. I am much more active on Twitter and Instagram to answer anybody's questions, and stay tuned for the next video. Thanks.